Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into the middle of nowhere for this chilling collection of stories, so get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When we were in high school in the early 1990s, we used to go out to a not-so-close lake and stay the night. We would build a campfire, tell stories and gossip, and then, when we got tired, we would just sleep in our cars. That one night it must have been around 11 p.m. We decided to go for a hike into the thick, wooded area. There was a trail, and there were 4 of us, 2 girls and 2 guys. We had flashlights but didn't really need them because the moon was bright. Then I heard something that sounded like faint music. I asked the others if they heard it as well, and they all said they did. It was like some music from a jewelry box, you know, the ones that have a small ballerina that spins around to the music when you open it. We just kept walking, wondering what we were listening to. Then, right in the middle of the trail, there it was, a white jewelry box with a ballerina. It was just in the middle of the trail, playing music ominously. We turned around and started to run. Then we stopped and decided to go back to where it was. But the damn thing was gone. Bear in mind, we hadn't been more than about 40 seconds and it was already gone. We ran back, put our fire out, and took our asses home. We never wanted to find out who had put the music box there and why they'd done it. But this ominous event left a very bitter taste in my mouth, and I haven't been camping since. It all started to a trip to a remote cabin deep in the mountains. My buddy, my wife, her friend and I decided to escape the hustle of city life for a weekend of hiking and solitude. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by miles of dense forest, and the only way in or out was a narrow, rugged trail. We learnt the previous tenants had been medevaced out due to an emergency, leaving all their belongings behind. My buddy and I decided to hike their stuff back down the mountain, a 3-mile trek each way so we could get it back to them. While we were gone, my wife and her friend decided to explore the area, taking a hike along one of the lesser-known trails. When we returned, they were waiting for us, visibly shaken. They described finding a decorative flamingo in the middle of the trail, bright pink, completely out of place. The trail was remote. They hadn't seen another soul the entire time, and we had no idea who would have put it there or why. A couple of times in my life I've encountered people in places where no one should have been. One of the most unsettling experiences happened while I was camping in a remote, rugged area. It was around 2 a.m. with a light mist falling. The only reason I was awake because I was getting into the outdoors and was struggling to get a fire going to cook the raw meat I had bought. I was frustrated and tired when out of nowhere this man showed up coming up the road from the wrong direction. His presence immediately felt off and I was on edge. He explained he had gotten turned around and asked if I could use my Jeep to take him where he wanted to go to camp. The story made sense, but the situation was weirding me out. He was easily in his 70s with an old metal frame pack, and he was completely alone. He seemed confused and lost, but there was something about the whole encounter that didn't sit right with me. Despite my unease, I invited him to share my campsite for the night, thinking it would be safer for both of us, but he insisted to getting to Green Pond that night, and for some inexplicable reason I agreed to drive him there. I'd never been down that road before. It was a very muddy, treacherous path that was more a series of mud pits than an actual road, but I found myself agreeing to take him anyway in the middle of the night. As we prepared to leave, I wanted a picture to remember this strange encounter. It all felt surreal, and I needed some kind of record to prove it actually happened. The picture I took of him was him pointing at the map. I'm not sure he even knew I was taking it, but I needed to capture that moment. We drove for nearly an hour in near silence until he suddenly said, "Okay, this is fine." I dropped him off in the middle of nowhere and watched him as he walked into the darkness. The next morning back at camp, I looked at the picture, but there was no man, just a blur where he should have been. Something about it chilled me to the bone. I went back to the spot where I had dropped him off, but there was no sign of him. No tracks, no camp, nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I'd been meaning to find that picture and share it, but something always held me back. Maybe I really don't want to dig deeper to see what I might discover happened that night. In another eerie experience, I stumbled upon markers in a remote area where Civil War soldiers had died. There were no headstones, just rough carvings into rocks, simple and crude. One read, "Jack Smith, gunshot," marking the spot where he had fallen. It was as if the landscape itself had remembered their deaths, leaving those quiet, unsettling reminders behind. Then there was the night I sat with two friends watching an orb, what some might call a will-o'-the-wisp, hovering silently in the distance. We stared at it for a full 30 minutes, none of us daring to speak, mesmerized and unnerved by its quiet glow. Then as suddenly as it had appeared, it faded away, leaving us in darkness, unsure of what it was we had just witnessed. Each of these experiences was strange enough on their own, but together they paint a picture of the wilderness as a place full of mystery, where reality sometimes seems to bend. I've come to accept that some things simply can't be explained, and perhaps they're better left that way. I was traveling to the North Carolina coast a few years ago. My two children and my sister were with me. I had been on a road that passes through the dismal swamp. It was just a two-lane road that was straight but wavy. It's the only way I can really describe it. It had very small hills, and even though you were going straight, it almost felt like you were riding waves. We had been on this road forever. You could see for miles ahead, and at some point it went from twilight to very dark. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw headlights way back behind me. These headlights started getting close too fast. I commented on how fast the car was approaching, and everyone in the car began paying attention. This road was very desolate on both sides of the road, as it was just swamp. Before it had gotten dark, we saw a few shacks, and they had little bridges from the road to the house to get over the swamp ditches. I made a comment that I hope we never get a flat, because there would be nowhere to pull over. With that, I noticed that the car had almost caught up to me. Everyone in the car was now panicking because it felt wrong. Why the hell was a car on this desolate swamp road desperately trying to rear-end us? The hair all over my body was standing on end, and I was just desperately hoping it would go around me. When it got to the point that I knew impact was imminent, I look up in my rearview mirror, and the car was suddenly gone. I look out my passenger window out in front of me, but it's not anywhere. The car is simply gone. Where the hell did it go? Everyone in the car muttered for a moment just to confirm we'd all seen the same thing, and everyone confirmed. 1 minute there was a car chasing us, probably with the intention of killing us for all we knew, and in the blink of an eye, when it was about to get us, it was gone. On the return trip, we made sure that there was plenty of daylight before we left, and I had never been so glad to get to civilization in my life. I think everyone in the car was slightly traumatized. I live in New Jersey. There are tons of woods here. I was in an abandoned former state-owned park area that had sections, I guess. Part was wetland, part perfectly spaced out pines, so I was in the latter part, and I was just walking. I'd sat down and eaten an apple on a stump and made my way there. I just kept going on though, like I normally would, and have done in years past, and I looked down at the base of one of the tall, thin, evenly spaced out trees and saw a 1-foot tiny lean-to shelter. So I got down and looked inside, and there were bird bones in it. This lean-to had just the triangle opening. The sides were even nicely done, pieces of twig and bark. I got up and looked around, and nearly every damned tree base I could see had one, and I would spy more animal bones inside a few. I stood up and felt watched. I had been here dozens of times, and had never had it trigger caveman instincts. I said loudly that I had a firearm and that I would be leaving now. I felt those eyes on me even after I was in my truck, which was probably 2 miles away, and I had no gun, but running felt like the worst idea. For context, I'm a male, and at the time was pretty strong. This area was bordering the Rancocas Indian Reserve in a kind of central South Jersey. I did go back years later, and it all seemed normal. Out back of my neck of the woods is an old dirt road. It's hard to access unless you know how to take a turn down another old road that runs around the back of the coal mine I work at. Anyhow, if you follow that old road until you get to a T intersection, you can either turn right out to Hale Creek or left, which will take you out to Mount Coolin. Now, Mount Coolin isn't much of a town anymore. It's an outback pub and that's it. There used to be a town there once, but everyone upped and left once the railroad line got moved to the coast. That was the only reason the town existed for so long, or at least as long as it did. It wasn't the start of the town though. Way back in the early 1900s, gold was found in the hills by a prospector named Thomas Coolin. He staked his claim and settled there with his family. Some local aboriginals found him and his family living on their land and weren't too happy about it, so they attacked him, throwing rocks through the windows and antagonizing him. Well, Thomas went out and shot the lot of them dead, and then, in a fit of grief over what he had done, sat down on his porch and blew his brains out all over the wall behind him. Fast forward to the year 2021. I was working out at Hale Creek Mine at the time on maintenance crew. I had a big 7 nights of 12-hour shifts and had had very little sleep. I had left my mining camp the following afternoon, still not feeling the best, but set out for the long drive back home. Dusk came along, then nightfall. I was driving for what seemed like forever, trying to make my way. I was constantly looking out for the turnoff on the old back road that ran up behind Goonyella Mine, but it never came. I kept on driving and driving. Hours went by. I was on a very unfamiliar road, and it started to bend and twist all over, and narrow to the point that my little Kia Rio could barely get by without scratching the sides on branches of looming trees over the road. I was definitely lost. So I pulled over to check Google Maps, and of course there's no signal. I was confused. Had I missed the turn? I thought maybe it was a little further up, so I pressed on and kept driving. When out of nowhere I see an old worn sign off to the left on the side of the road that said Mount Coolin 15k. I thought, okay, yep, I've gone way too far out into the sticks, I better turn around. Before I could though, I saw off to my right the entrance to what looked like a cemetery with an old rusty archway, and above the archway was in rusty wrought iron letterings, Betsy's Rest. Well, my curiosity got the better of me, so I veered in there to have myself a quick look. Sure as hell there was a road that went in a giant U-shape around the old cemetery, full of tombstones, generations of cattle farmers and jackaroos who must have worked on the various stations in the area. It gave me the spooks pretty bad, so I got out of there quickly and made my way back onto the old back road. I kept heading back from whence I came, hoping and praying that I would find this bloody T intersection. Over an hour passed and then my worst fear happened. The fuel light flickered on my dashboard. I'm driving on this road in the middle of nowhere. It's midnight and no one will probably find me for days if I ran out of fuel. I was absolutely crapping myself. This is the outback of Australia. If you run out of fuel, food or water in the outback, you've just signed your death certificate, done and dusted. All I had were a few sandwiches I took from the camp mess hall and a bottle of water. Better than nothing, but not enough to last a few days stranded out on the side of an old back road with no phone service. So I kept cruising along, being extremely careful not to go too quickly or over-accelerate around all the twists and turns. As I'm driving along this lonely road, I see a shadow out of the corner of my eye. I think nothing of it, keeping focused on the road ahead, and then I hear it, swooping and whooshing noises above my car. I look up and see what I can only describe as a giant bat creature with red eyes flying directly above it. It startles me and makes me accelerate at a rapid rate, but it's flying effortlessly over my head and keeping pace. I'm watching my speedometer reach neck-breaking speeds, and I'm bouncing all over the old and bumpy dirt road while this creature glides down to my driver's side window, looks inside at me and grimaces. And when it does, it flies up and disappears into the night, just as quickly as it appeared. I floored that old clunker of a car of mine until my heart leapt with joy at the sign of life in that desolate hellscape. I saw the Goonyella mine CHPP lights cut through the vast and empty void of darkness. I knew then and there that I was within 15 kilometers of the intersection and turned off back home, and sure as hell I found it. I managed to get all the way back home and was very grateful that my clunker ran on an oily rag and the vapors left in my tank. I told my partner at the time about the nightmare that I'd been through, as she had been expecting me home the evening prior, and it was now 6 a.m. in the morning. My phone was full of missed calls from her, which I apologized profusely for. I hadn't even thought to check it, as I had no signal for the better part of the entire journey. Well, months passed, and I kept having recurring nightmares about the vile winged creature that had entered my dreams. I awoke one night sweating in bed. My heart was racing. My partner asked what was wrong. I had been waking her up late at night and would have this horrible nightmare. The whole situation had impacted me. The desolate hellscape would re-emerge in the dark nights, plagued by the old outback road menacing my demise, with the off chance I would make one wrong move and come undone, escaping that creature. Something had to be done, and I knew what I needed to do. You see, I'm a man that will openly admit that I cannot overcome anything in life unless you face it head on. That's the only way I know how. No use sticking to your head in the sand and pretending things will just go away. So I spoke with my partner, and after much discussion, we agreed we should go back and investigate the back road to Mount Coolan to investigate the town itself. And to drive the nail in, we were going to do it at night. I needed answers. I needed to know what lay at the end of that old road, and whatever else I might have missed on my first misadventure. We set out at 6:30 p.m. and headed for the old back road, which is now inaccessible. You can go take a look yourself, but the mine has shut the gate as it runs along the inside of the mine's boundary. Anyhow, we were driving my partner's new Mitsubishi Mirage. It was a real beast of a car, but it had all the kit we needed for the long drive, and we made sure we were prepped. We took an esky full of food, water and snacks, my toolkit in case of a breakdown, torches or flashlights for you guys in the States, first aid kit, two-way radio, battery pack for 2 phones and two-way radio, my hunting knife, and the first leg of our adventure was rather fun. I felt a bit like Colin McRae taking the old first dirt road that twisted and turned in all directions. Slithering my way up to the T intersection, and once we got there I took the left turn to head north and gradually west. The familiar road was as it was the night I encountered the strange beast, except tonight brought a slight amount of comfort as there was a full moon in the night sky, illuminating the surroundings and edges of the road. As we approached the old cemetery, I told my partner to look right. She was in awe. I asked if she wanted to go in and take a look, but she was too nervous about it, so we kept driving along. As the night went on, we came to the point of no return. The road got very narrow and snaked right and left, up and down. We were in unfamiliar territory now, and I was growing apprehensive about what I would see or find. At one point I swore there was no road at all. We were basically driving through a wide open field and had to drive at 40 to avoid hitting any ruts or depressions in the bull dust. I was starting to think this entire trip might have been a mistake when the road came good again to compacted dirt. A random sign appeared off to the side of the road stating we were now deep in Aboriginal land, and that it was how it would remain until the end of time itself. The drive went on, and hours had passed. Were we any closer to our destination? For reference, I switched the car's function from Bluetooth headset to radio to scan the FM/AM for any signs of life. Nothing. I thought, well, I'll check again in an hour. An hour had passed, so I checked again. Scanning, A muffled and distorted voice emitted through our car, and then the sweet sound of music. It was AC/DC's Highway to Hell. How befitting, I thought to myself. We checked Google Maps and had 2 bars. According to it, we were about 30 minutes away from a fork in the road, one heading west out to the Never Never, and another heading to Mount Coolin. Good thing we checked. So we headed towards, and sure enough, there it was, the fork in the road. No signage indicating which way to go, just one road slightly more compact than the other, and wider. So we kept true to the road that we were on, and then came to a faint glimmer in the distance, a faint yellow light on the horizon. As we approached the light, it developed into a service station off to the left of the old dirt road, with a storefront that looked completely empty save for a cash register and a countertop. Signage indicating to head right was to head towards Collinsville, left, out west into the Never Never. I came to a stop off the right shoulder off the road on a dirt patch made by trucks that had turned here before. I checked the fuel gauge half tank. I looked into the old rundown service station, scanning the area for any signs of life other than the faint yellow glow of the iridescent tube lights above the old and rusted browsers that looked like they hadn't been used since the 80s. Then I saw a figure emerging from a back room, a frail old woman, her hair tattered and distressed. It looked like we had awoken her. It was around 11:30 p.m., and she came to a stop inside the abandoned storefront and just stood there staring at our car. I thought I'd better come forward and ask if there was any chance of fueling up. So I pulled in and rolled down my window, and she came outside into the night air and approached me with a great deal of hesitation. "Excuse me, I'm so sorry if we woke you. We just wondered if you had any fuel." She stood there glaring and studying me, her face withered from the harsh outback climate. "Nah, no fuel here. You better leave. Nah." Something fell off. There was tension between us, and so I said, "Okay, thank you. Sorry, we'll go now." I wound up the window and got out of there. We drove around the old pub in the center of what was once town, and I had multiple V-double road train tracks parked all around it, almost like they were protecting the pub itself with a wall of steel and rubber in the desolate darkness. A picnic table with a tin roof cover appeared on the right of this massive road loop, the only road in the entire area that was sealed, and even then it was rather narrow. When we finally reached Mount Coolin, we found an old outback pub/general store/post office. The most notable thing I'll say about this pub is that it had an amazing veranda. It fully encompassed the exterior ground level and was solid hardwood varnished. Whoever owns the pub had taken great care to preserve it, as it's all that really remains of the town bar, the old petrol station, converted into an old couple's home now. As for lighting, the place was clearly not welcoming after dark, albeit for 2 streetlights in the entire area that glowed faintly, only illuminating small patches of the loop road. You definitely wouldn't want to be out there with no headlights. We did take a brief tour, and that was all that was there, then made our way back towards the road back home. My partner said hold up, so I came to a stop again off the side of the road, back out to Monrumba. She said she had discovered on Google Maps a quicker way back home, and it would take us out on that old dirt road west of the fork. However, as you continue down the road for 50 kilometers, you come to another fork. Taking the leftward one would take us home. So we went. The Mitsubishi ran on an oily rag too, and it was only a little 4-cylinder powerhouse like my Kia Rio, so I felt confident we would make it back. On the drive back, it was another long and slow slog. At some points, I'd have to drive at 20 just to make it around the tight bends and twistings and turnings through the roughened thoroughfare, which had been wide open cattle farming properties. Then at points, the bushland would thicken around creeks and runoff areas, and you couldn't see a meter off the side of the road. After taking the leftward turn, there was a slight fork in the road. We made our way homebound, when it happened. A large creature came bounding out of the dense bushland and right out in front of our car. I came to an abrupt stop, and there in our headlights was a massive cow. I looked at it and took off back into the bushland. I was a little stunned. That was close, too close. So we went back home. Just for context, if your car was to hit a cow, your car would be the one in danger, as would you be. The rest of our journey was mundane to say the least. The only exception was an interesting stretch of road that had been well sealed and snaked through dense bushland. I was impressed by the craftsmanship of how well compacted it was, and then suddenly we were back on the dirt road again. Hours on and we made it to the Goonyella Road, intersections with lighting signals, the turn-offs to local mines and explosive factories to make the bomb products for them, and so on and so forth. The usual akin of the coalfields. Then we made it home at the first light of morning, which we could see over the horizon. As we pulled into our driveway, we both looked at each other, shrugged, as if to say, what the hell was all that about? Then got out of the car and went inside. It's a strange feeling out there, the desolation, the lack of everything. It's what really drives the tension. Any moment can be fraught with demise, but it gave me the closure that I needed to put the rest of the monsters in my head, whatever I saw that night, to rest. 5 or 6 years ago, I had a really strange encounter as a teen that I have never been able to explain or make sense of. This story takes place in Raleigh, North Carolina. There is a nature reserve area near my old neighborhood that I used to frequent with friends that became our unofficial hangout/smoke spot. The nature reserve is called Shenneck Forest. The area is owned and managed by North Carolina State University and is home to some of the veterinary school horses. It also operates as a teaching and research site for the university's forest management program. The land itself has an interesting history prior to it being used for university purposes, as there was a prison farm on the land pre-1930s. When visiting this area, even prior to this experience, my friends and I would always joke about how the land had a strange energy and feel to it. In the parking area of the reserve, there was a small graveyard and abandoned house, which certainly further contributes to the interesting vibes. However, I felt scared or uncomfortable in the space and would often go to the area alone. One night I was about to meet up with my friend in the nature reserve park. She was getting off work that night, and I ended up beating her there. While waiting for her, I parked my car off to the side of the road and turned it around to face the direction in which you would enter the park area. Behind me was the graveyard, and I would see the area decently well in my rear view and left side mirror. It is important to mention that my car was the only car there, and there were no other humans in sight. The time was just past 7 in the middle of October, and the sun was almost completely set, and it was starting to get dark out. After arriving at the park, I sat in my car for a few minutes on my phone trying to kill time while waiting for my friend. After sitting there for a moment, something caught my eye in the side mirror of my car. In the graveyard area behind my vehicle, there was a small fire that had started on the ground. My immediate reaction was to get out of the car and to stomp out the flames, and that is exactly what I did. I found it a bit odd that this fire had started seemingly out of nowhere, but presumed that someone had tossed a cigarette out before I had arrived. The fire was in an area where there were dry leaves on the ground, so this was a plausible explanation at that time. After stomping the small fire out, I got back into my car and continued scrolling on my phone. It was almost completely dark at this point and the sun had gone beneath the horizon. And again something caught my eye on the side mirror of the car. The fire had seemingly reappeared instantaneously, and immediately I presumed I had failed to put out the first fire completely, and got out of my vehicle once again to try and extinguish the flames. Upon getting out of the car, I realized the fire was separate from the first one. It had started approximately a foot behind where the charred spot in the leaves from the first fire was. After realizing that the ground had spontaneously caught fire not once but twice now, in a graveyard at night, I began to get a little creeped out and sped walked back to my car to leave. I didn't bother putting out the second fire, I just put it into drive, glanced back into my rear view to witness a third fire spontaneously start behind the second, which was still burning. This time I saw the fire begin with my own eyes, and I sped off and left the park. This whole situation made me uncomfortable and confused. The next time that I returned to the area after this experience, the ground was still charred in 3 paces in a perfectly vertical line. This occurrence was not a figment of my imagination or a delusion, and I have never heard of or experienced anything like this in the years after. Ever since this experience, I've been trying to come up with a reasonable explanation for how this could have happened, but I have been entirely unable to do so. There were no other humans around, and with the sun being down, there's no plausible way that these fires could have just been brush fires started by direct sunlight. I'm not religious and do not actively practice spirituality, but I feel like these spontaneous fires was a sign that I was unwelcome there, or at least at that time. The entire experience has left me confused for years, and if anyone has a scientific explanation or theory as to how it would happen, I would love to hear it. 2 years after this, I had an experience. There was an execution-style murder committed in the exact graveyard I had this experience. This was very surprising to my community, as we all considered our neighborhood to be very safe, and nothing like this had taken place in the area prior. She has currently been held in a detention center and is awaiting trial. The strangest thing I've ever experienced is when I lived in Germany as a kid in the 70s, as we lived on a US military base. 2 of our favorite places to hang out were the military police guard shack near the base housing and the gorgeous German woods. At that time, it wasn't uncommon to come across a tunnel or World War II stuff while in the woods. One thing that stands out is an experience we had in the woods in the middle of nowhere behind the base. So we were just walking around, me and my friend, when we stumble across someone who we recognize. The guy is walking in the other direction to us, and we get a clear look at his face and he clearly looks at ours. We'd seen this guy around before, and that's when it hit me. You see, we hung out a lot in the military police guard shack, and in doing so, we saw a lot of the wanted posters for the people in that area who were wanted. There was a group of declared terrorists operating in the area at the time, known to engage in bombing, kidnapping, and political assassinations. The targets included US military police and other groups. I'm glad that they didn't directly aim to take the lives of children, and he knew we recognized him from the look we shared. But nonetheless, instead of pursuing us, instead of trying to take us or do anything, he simply kept on walking in the direction he was going, as did we. Nonetheless, that moment, the tension in those few seconds where we realized we were face to face with a wanted terrorist and just casually walking by him, scared the crap out of me and my friend. Of course, we ran back to the military police shack and told them immediately, but as we were young children, they simply didn't take us seriously. And when we told them independently, something like third picture down on the right in the guard shack, they knew we were telling the truth. But by that point, it was too late. I don't know if they ever caught him or not. I'm just glad that I wasn't a target. These stories take place between the ages of 18 and 24, before I moved away from the area. It's a small town in southern Kentucky. There's nothing to do, and my friend and I were always adventurous. And in a small town, being adventurous means either getting into meth or driving along the back roads and just discovering. We opted for the latter, listening to music, maybe going caving. And anyway, that led to some interesting experiences which I'm going to share with you now. Way the hell out in the country, the middle of nowhere, with no cell service. We're both 19 at the time. Sometimes we check out the supposedly haunted locations, but this was not one of those nights. Nothing ever happened those nights. That night was just a regular let's drive around in the boonies kind of night, and it was fall and 2 a.m. We decided to go down this particularly small, easily missed road that we've been to multiple times both day and night. It goes down into the middle of the woods, and at the end is a freshly paved parking lot and a more modern built small church. It's kind of odd because it's just like, why? There's no creep factor as to the church itself, no dumb local stories, it's just a church and the country people used it. Before you get to the lot, there's a spring and the shortest concrete bridge ever that you drive over. Our idea was to park the car and chill on the bridge. However, when we came around the bend and the bridge was immediately in sight, a large, tall man was standing dead center of it. The dude was disheveled, no shoes, dirty, and had tattered overalls on. Like, think mountain feral hillbilly, and you've got it. The last thing we expected to see all the way out there at 2 a.m. Scared the hell out of us. This guy's reaction was to jump down and scramble up underneath the bridge. There was nowhere to turn around before the bridge, so we had to speed over it into the lot and sped out of there. There's nothing paranormal to this story and probably just some weird-ass mountain hillbilly man, but goddamn if that's not the most unsettling thing to see in the middle of nowhere with no cell service. Once again, we were out driving around late at night listening to music very loudly on backcountry roads. It was either summer or early fall, and we're 19. It was just the two of us. My friend was driving his car, and I had my upper body out the window just being stupid. That's when out of my peripheral vision I saw a large black mass come out of the top of the tree line. Before I even knew what happened, it was on me and something hit me in the head. I instinctively threw myself back into the car while my friend was screaming and slamming on his brakes. We came to a stop in the middle of the road and I look over and he's just crying. And we both realize what happened. A large great horned owl swooped down and slapped me across the face and flew directly in front of his windshield, obscuring the whole thing. He thought it was Mothman in a panic. I've never laughed so hard in my life, but I'm glad that it was nothing sinister, but it was frightening to happen in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, as you can undoubtedly understand. My best friend and I once illegally climbed a mountain in northwestern Oregon with our dogs. We started off parked in a no trespassing zone on an abandoned logging road, and we hiked along a long, overgrown trail that we were absolutely not supposed to be on. I'm gonna go ahead and blame it on us being young and dumb, but we knew it was a bad plan. No one knew where we were, and it would have taken quite the rescue mission to even locate our car. We made it to the summit. We spent some time messing around and eating lunch up there, and we decided to head back down. But we needed more water. We drank more than we thought we would, again being young and dumb. We heard the sound of running water about an hour into our trek down, and we had to hack through a bunch of devil's clubs and stinging nettles to even get close enough to filter it. We and our dogs were getting scraped to hell, and we chopped our way into a random clearing with a pile of animal skulls and bones just sitting in the middle of it. The clearing was probably 12 feet around, and the pile was at least 4 feet tall. There was a main stalk of Devil's Club, maybe 5 to 6 feet tall, stuck firmly into the earth in the center, and then bones were stacked around it, almost vertically, caught on the thorns with a raccoon skull precariously on the top. I'm surprised I wasn't dumb enough to grab one of those bones and end up with a cursed souvenir, but we were spooked. There were also ripped up shreds of fabric stuck and tied onto the trees surrounding the clearing, like the kind that comes from a windbreaker, nylon. I didn't find the bones themselves inherently creepy by any means, but any intentional outdoor collection that seems to be maintained and deliberately placed? No thanks. To this day I have no idea what it was or who put them there, but we talk about it all the way back. I can't stress how abandoned this trail was. We had to cut trees off the road just to get to the head of it. We didn't see another car or human the entire day, but it didn't look like something that could have been there for years. A single winter storm would have knocked it down. The way they were stacked so precisely and vertically still gives me chills just thinking about it. I live in western Montana, and about 6 years ago had the strangest experience. I was huckleberry picking with my dad and decided to walk up the trail with my .22 rifle to look for grouse. As I was walking, I heard the lightest footsteps coming from above me. The trail was on an incline, and I assumed it was a deer, until I noticed the steps stopped whenever I did, and were way too quiet for a deer. So I decided to look above me, and behind a bush was a person type of thing. I saw the creature's shoulder, nipple, arm, and collarbone. It was hairless and a dark tan color. It was a very small creature, and the weirdest part to me was seeing its nipple. I've heard stories of the little people that live in the woods, but you never know. It could have been a lotion person picking along and trying to be discreet. But why were they not wearing a shirt and following alongside me on this trail? I ran for it after the encounter and cried in front of my dad because it was scary as hell. I'm a pretty outdoorsy person, and to this day, this is still the strangest experience for me in the woods. About 12 years ago, while on a 10-day hunting trip in northern Michigan, we were at a place called Dead Stream Swamp. We used to tent it back in those days, and it was about the third week of November, so it was cold and about 6 to 10 inches on the ground. It was time to call it a night, but we got in our mummy bags, on our cots, and had a small battery-operated radio we would listen to while falling asleep. The Michigan backwoods get dark as hell. I mean pitch black and eerie. I passed right out this night, but got woken up sometime later by my hunting buddy Dave saying my name repeatedly. I was sleeping so well, I literally remember thinking it was the radio playing. Then I took notice of my name, and Dave sounded terrified. I said, "What?" Dave said, "Dude, get your gun." I didn't realize what was wrong. He told me that some dude was here. And for context, we are backwood campers. We didn't stay at state parks or campgrounds. We were at least a good 40-minute drive back in the thick Michigan-Huron National Forest from any roads or civilizations. And we had set up our camp at the end of a very long dead-end 2-track. We had been there for 5 or 6 days at this point, and never saw anyone, not another soul. So I'm all like in disbelief. Mumbled something like, "What do you mean someone's here? Did you order a pizza?" It was at that moment I finally came to enough to realize the radio was off, but I could hear AC/DC blaring through the forest and a faint sound of an old pickup truck blazing up the 2-track towards our camp. I had a big tent with a huge rubber tarp draped over it, so it was hard to tell there was a tent there if you didn't know there was. At this time I realized this was wrong and no one should be driving up to our camp in the middle of the night, so I reached for my firearm. Now the headlights were moving across the tent while the truck made its way through the winding 2-track and was within 100 yards of our tent. I finally heard yelling over the AC/DC, which sounded like an old drunk hillbilly screaming with a screechy-like voice, saying something about, "Hey, you neighbors, get your asses out of here." At this point, he had his truck about a foot away from the door of my tent and was revving his engine. It blew my mind this guy found us or even knew we were here. This was super odd. In all my fear, I racked a shell into my Winchester 20 gauge and screamed, "You better get out of here, I ain't playing around." The engine revved louder and his truck inched closer to our tent. I thought for sure he was going to run us down. I yelled as loud as I could again that I wasn't playing and that I was about to shoot. He must have got the message because he backed up his truck and left very slowly. The rest of the trip had a very odd feeling and we never figured out who he was or where he had come from. Way up by the dirt road where we turned off to get back there were 2 or 3 old mobile home trailers that reminded me of the movie The Hills Have Eyes. Just very dirty, lots of odd things hanging on the porches and junk everywhere in the front yard, like old fridges and junk cars and trash. I'm assuming the guy lived in one, but we never found out. Still gives me the creeps thinking about it. I thought I was going to have to shoot him in fear of our lives. It was extremely frightening to say the least. I was driving through the misty backroads of southwestern Mississippi, near the Homochito National Forest one eerie night, heading back home to Texas after wrapping up a work assignment. That's when I noticed an old, battered Dodge pickup truck coming from the opposite direction suddenly make a sharp U-turn and accelerate towards me. My headlights briefly illuminated the occupants as they passed by, two large, burly figures who appeared to be stark naked. The sight sent a chill down my spine, and when I saw them rapidly gaining on me in my rearview mirror, adrenaline kicked in. Instinctively, I switched on my powerful spotlight, extinguished my other lights to reduce visibility from behind, and floored the accelerator. The engine roared as I pushed my speedometer to its limits, keeping a keen eye on the road ahead to avoid any dead end or obstacles. My GPS became my lifeline, guiding me on the quickest route while I maintained a speed of between 90 and 120, determined to put as much distance as possible between me and those unsettling pursuers. The minutes stretched out agonizingly as I raced through the night, heart pounding with each passing moment. It was a tense battle of wits and speed, fueled by fear and my desperate need to escape. Only when I was sure that I had shaken them off did I dare to ease off the accelerator and breathe a sigh of relief. Looking back on that chilling encounter, it remains the most unnerving experience of my life, an encounter that seemed straight out of a thriller movie with a dash of deliverance-like suspense that I was desperate to avoid. And if you find yourself on a lonely road in the middle of nowhere at night chased by people, I suggest you try and get out of there as quickly as possible. It was a Sunday when we went out on an outing to the place with several dams and lakes, seeking to escape the noise of the city and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of nature we were so desperately craving. When we arrived, we were surprised by the explosion of life around us. Everything had turned green thanks to the rain, and the landscape was vibrant and fresh. The trees with their lush foliage and the dense, exuberant undergrowth were at their summer best. Although we weren't in the middle of nowhere, the place felt far removed from our usual environment, surrounded by a serenity not easily found in our city. We reached the highest dam, which was surrounded by trees and very green grass. As expected, many locals from a nearby community would gather there. Life was teeming everywhere. I was with my Sheltie dog, and we were observing a spot by the water, trying to figure out how we could walk around. Then, we saw hundreds of tadpoles by the shore. It's always beautiful to see how life is reborn with the rain, as if there had never been a drought. I watched them for a while, took some pictures and called my friend over to see them. At that moment, everything was pure happiness, until I walked past a tree where a group of teenagers on quad bikes were hanging out. I honestly didn't pay much attention to them until I noticed that they had lined up some tadpoles on the bike. They were casually piercing them with a needle. I couldn't help myself. I'd been a teacher for many years, and without thinking, I began to reprimand them and ask them why they were killing them. One of them looked at me and answered, "Just 'cause." I don't remember exactly what I said at the moment. I don't know if I told him not to kill them, but I was furious. The boy threw the tadpole to the ground. They kept watching what I was doing. I tried to continue on my way with my dog, but my friend and I were quite upset. I was just disgusted by the cruelty. As we moved away, I kept saying things out loud to my friend like, "What stupid people?" And the teenagers heard me and began to imitate and mock me. My friend and I agreed that we should probably try and distance ourselves from them and maybe leave, because a group of pissed off teenagers can be a dangerous thing to two women on a walk. And as we continued our walk, we passed some older guys drinking beer. As this was a new trail to us, we didn't realize that it performed a kind of loop. And as we were going back around, we realized we were going to pass those exact same teenagers again, and there was really no other way to go. So, we just tried to walk as quickly as we could as we passed them from the other side of the trail. They were staring and jeering at us and made us quite uncomfortable as they mocked and were rude. I don't know if you've ever felt vulnerable in a situation like this, but I have, and it really makes you feel uncomfortable. The fear that they might just run up and do something to you, knowing that they probably can outclass you in strength and do who knows what to you for their amusement, another victim like the poor tadpoles. But I tried not to think about it, just walk quicker past them. That's when we saw that the same older guys that were drinking beer were now giving these teenagers who were probably underage some beer for them as well, and I wondered if the guys might be a little buzzed and thus perhaps a bit more inclined to do something reckless. When we finally reached the car, the atmosphere became tense. My friend and I walked quickly, feeling the weight of those young people's stares on our shoulders. My Sheltie, always alert, seemed to sense the change in the environment too, staying close to me. Her ears perked up and her steps nervous. We reached the car and I quickly opened the door for my friend and my dog to get in. As I climbed into the driver's seat, I glanced one last time to where those teenagers were. They were still there, drinking, laughing, and seemingly enjoying the impact their cruelty had caused and the fear they had instilled in us. I felt a mix of helplessness and anger, but I also knew the right thing to do was to leave as quickly as possible. As I drove away, the sound of gravel under the tires and crunch of branches under the car's weight seemed to echo into the tense silence. Neither of us spoke. Suddenly, I noticed that the teenagers, along with some of the older men, had begun to follow us. They insulted us, shouting angry words, and at one point began to throw stones and bottles towards our car. My heart pounded. I felt fear course through my body, but I kept control and just sped the car up. Bear in mind, to leave the area that we were in, you had to go at 10 miles an hour, so it wasn't a challenge for them to keep up. I knew that in some towns, you could be lynched for less, and that thought terrified me. Even though I felt bad, as though I had left something important behind, we knew we couldn't stay and try and change the mind of the people who had no intention of listening. Finally, we reached the main road and the feeling of relief began to replace the tension, and we agreed that we did the right thing. We didn't need it to escalate to violence, and we probably saved ourselves from serious harm from these absolute idiots. The drive home was quiet, with the bad taste of what happened lingering within us. Sometimes I reflect back on that situation, and I knew that on that day we were in real danger. It was truly a terrifying moment that could have ended much worse. And though it taught me the importance of standing firm in our values, it also underlined the need to recognize when it's crucial to prioritize safety and just walk away. Something strange happened when I was hiking the Superstition Mountains. There were no other cars in the parking lot or dirt area, so it was just me with my dog. The trail I was following got confusing, and I was led to a fence where it just seemed to end. The sun started to set, so I decided to turn around anyway. Really stupid of me to go hiking alone this late in the day. It was strange that initially when I walked through the area, my dog got really freaked out and everything was really quiet. All the bugs and birds had stopped making noise, and my dog was being very skittish all of a sudden. I got worried there was a mountain lion around and kind of ran through that area, and a few minutes later, there were normal sounds again. It was a bit after this that the trail got weird on me, and I realized it was going to be getting dark soon, so I decided to turn around. When we got back to the area where it had been quiet, I started to feel on edge again, and I could tell my dog did too. And that's when we came across this guy. When I turned around to walk away, I heard something behind me, so I turned to look. I saw an older man with grey hair, a red button-up shirt and jeans. Not really what you'd hike in. He had no hat or backpack or anything on him. He was just walking towards the actual Superstition Mountain on the other side of the fence. I saw his back and he never turned around. It was odd because he wasn't there 1 second and then he was. He wasn't just walking around the trail or anything. Just through straight desert. He didn't turn to look at me, and since he looked out of place, I got frightened and power walked back to the car. He was walking in the opposite direction to where you get off the trail to park your car, like going into the desert. There were still no other cars in the lot when I reached mine, and it was already pitch black out. And I got to my car probably 20 minutes after seeing him. So what the hell was this guy doing? Everyone has told me I definitely saw a ghost out there, but what's even weirder is because I never saw his face. I probably wouldn't have noticed him if it wasn't for the red shirt he had on, because it stood out and caught my eye. I haven't been back to the particular trail since. It was one of the more remote areas of the mountain too. I know some of the trails are really popular, but this one you had to drive several miles off-roading to get to. My friends and I had this hangout spot in the middle of nowhere that we would go to drink and smoke weed, called the Tunnel. It wasn't a real tunnel, just a dirt road with tall trees on either side that looked like a tunnel. The guys in our friends group would always tell us scary stories that had happened to them while they were there. I just thought they were trying to scare us because every time before this night, nothing creepy had ever happened. We had snuck out, and it was in the middle of the night, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. We were drinking and just sitting in the car talking, when suddenly my friend in the driver's seat whispers, "What's that in the middle of the road up there?" I looked and didn't see anything, so I said, "There's nothing in the road. Your eyes are playing tricks on you." And he insists that there is something, but the passenger says he sees something, and I laugh and call BS. The driver puts the car in drive and slowly starts rolling forwards, when suddenly a figure emerges from the darkness. It was a man standing right in the middle of the road watching us drive towards him. He was not wearing shoes, had no shirt, and was only wearing shorts. It was a cold fall night, and he was wearing shorts, and topless and shoeless on a dirt road. His eyes were glowing yellow like a deer's eyes in headlights, and we all started screaming and freaking out. The driver asks if he should stop, and we all yell for him to just drive. The man continues to stare us down as we're driving towards him, and once we get about 10 feet from him, he calmly walks to the side of the road and disappears completely. This road had tall fences with even taller willows growing over it. It was probably 10 to 12 feet tall. There's no way a normal gentleman could have cleared that. I've never seen anyone's eyes glow in headlights before or since, and I'm pretty sure this man was something else, perhaps a skinwalker, as we weren't too far from the Skinwalker Ranch, but I can't get a logical explanation of what the hell happened that night. I've spent most of my life running around the woods of southern Oregon, and I've seen some weird stuff. The first story is from out in the middle of nowhere, far from any road, when my friend and I stumbled across a large fence area. It was a 10-foot chain-link fence. Inside the fence were all these trees planted in perfectly straight rows. No biggie, the Forest Service does sciencey stuff out in the woods sometimes. What was odd is that every single tree was bent into a specific shape. All of them were crooked in the exact same way. We didn't climb the fence that day because our dogs were acting very sketchy and one ran off. And despite looking, I never found that place again. Back then, I was convinced it was a nefarious government project, like Stranger Things. The vibe was really weird out there. In our defense, now that I think about it, maybe someone was growing trees in this shape to make a boat. I read that people do this. The woods can be spooky sometimes. Another time, with that same friend, we were in the middle of nowhere dry camping and hiking with the dogs. We found a small clearing that housed within it a twin-sized rusty old iron bed frame, a small rusted-out cook stove, and some other rusty buckets and stuff. The odd part is that it was far from anything, even old logging spur roads. Whoever lived out there didn't really want to be found or bothered. I can't blame them, really. I was in California around Humboldt. We were driving from Portland to San Diego on the ocean route, and we pulled over after a bridge to go to the bathroom. There was a path down a canyon to a large stream. Immediately I started seeing about every few feet cheap stuffed animals, the kind that feels stuffed with straw and crunchy after you win it in a claw machine in a carnival. Garish colours and texturally grotesque. Halfway down I feel I'm far enough away from the road. I go back a little bit from the trail, pull my pants down and hear, "Hi." I turn around and see a toothless Jesus in his crucifix era sitting in a tent, only the tent is made of these cheap stuffed animals. He's wearing a windsuit, 1990s soprano style, and I look up and see there are hundreds stuffed animals nailed to the surrounding trees or hanging on nooses made with shoelace. I pull up my pants and smiled so loudly and said hi back, just overcompensating for my discomfort with volume. My boyfriend on the path came running. He saw the man wave to him, grabbed me and ushered me away as we ran back to the car. If he wasn't there to corroborate what I saw, I swear it would have just been a hallucination in my mind. I don't know if he had bad intentions given what he was doing, but I'm glad I never got to find out. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's adventures in the middle of nowhere. If you'd like to see more, video links can be found on screen shortly. And a huge thanks as always to my members and patrons. If you'd like bonus content, feel free to check out the links in the description and to have your name in the credits. But until then, more content on screen. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.